is Anand, and welcome to another edition of the 1500 plus SAT Masterclass. Okay, so today we are going to be looking at the grammar section of the SAT, and we are specifically going to focus on the topic punctuating items in a series. Okay, so this is going to be a very, very short topic, and we'll also look at a few questions that look for the concepts that we are going to be discussing in this video. So stay with me till the very end. And this is also a very important topic, and you can certainly expect one or two questions on the SAT that deals with punctuating, a series of either words or expressions. Okay, so there are simple series, there's complex series. So we'll look at both and see how to punctuate them. And I see a lot of students in Just Logged in their practice tests making mistakes, especially in complex series. Okay, so just stay with me, and this video is going to clarify all of that. Okay, and this video is part of a series on SAT grammar. So I've put a link to the playlist in the description. So go ahead and watch the videos in sequence. Also, practice is what makes things perfect, right? So I provided link to Just Logged in. Just go there, practice this specific pattern. We have a number of questions there. Just go ahead and practice this. And of course, we also have section tests, and in fact, you can take unlimited section tests there, and we also have full length tests also. Okay, so go ahead and use all of those resources. All right, so let's dive right in. Okay, so I'm going to start with an example. Okay, so take the sentence. For the SAT, you are allowed to bring pencils, a calculator for the math section, and a traditional watch, right? So this is a series, right? So there are three things that you are allowed to bring. So you are allowed to bring pencils, a calculator for the math section, and a traditional watch. Okay. So what you're going to do is you are going to separate these items by a comma. Okay, so that is a punctuation for series. So you have something like you're bringing A, B, and C. Okay, and it's important to put a comma before the last and, or rather, the and before the last item in the series. So this is known as an Oxford comma. Okay, there are some debates on whether this comma is needed or not, but then for SAT, they don't call this section the grammar section. They call it standard English conventions. Okay, so as far as the SAT is concerned, the standard conventions of American English involves the use of the Oxford comma. Okay, so don't debate that. You lose points. So just go ahead and use the comma before the and. Okay, normally you will not see questions on the SAT where you have one option with the comma and one option without the comma, but know that you have to put a comma before the and, in front of the and, that is before the last item in the series. All right, so that is that. So this is the basic series punctuation. All right. So remember this pattern. So we're going to see a lot of examples, but essentially you probably are familiar. Okay, just use comma to punctuate items in a series. All right. So now I'm going to write another sentence here. Okay. The emergency kit contained bottled water enough for 3 days, canned food stored in airtight containers, and medical supplies, including bandages and antiseptic wipes. Okay, so if you really look at it, we have three things. So we have bottled water, canned food, and medical supplies. So if it were just bottled water, canned food, and medical supplies, you could just use commas, just like you did bring pencils, a calculator for math section, and a traditional watch. If it were like that, you would just use commas. But instead here, there is a qualifier for each of this item. Like for example, here it says bottled water enough for 3 days. Okay, so that itself has a comma, right? Bottled water enough for 3 days. So this is supplementary information, right? For this item here, or noun here, which is bottled water, and then similarly here, canned food, comma, stored in airtight containers, and medical supplies, including bandages and antiseptic wipes. Okay, so each item internally has a comma. So therefore, when you have a series where each item in the series already has a comma, then you use a semicolon. Okay, so use the semicolon as some kind of a super comma. Okay, so when do you use the super comma or the semicolon? So you use that when items in a series already have a comma. Okay, so then you use a semicolon. Okay, so so remember, so this is a simple series. Okay, and this is a complex series. All right, so pardon my handwriting. I use a tablet and I write, and then I see this on the screen. So my handwriting is generally screwed up. So pardon my handwriting here. So this is a complex series. Okay. So remember this, the use of a semicolon, because the hard questions in punctuating a series is going to involve the use of semicolons. Okay. And when they give you a question like this, typically what's going to happen is they will put they'll put a blank here. Like for example, canned food. Maybe they'll put a blank here. Like, okay, maybe let me use a different color. They may put a blank here, right, including this punctuation. Okay, and then you will have choices where you probably don't have a punctuation or a colon, a comma, and a semicolon. So what you need to do is you need to understand that, hey, there is already a comma inside, and also look at the rest of the sentence. If it already has a semicolon punctuating items in the series, then you have to use a punctuation. Okay, so sometimes what happens is not every item in the series may have a comma. Maybe only one item has a comma, or maybe two items have a comma and the third one does not. You would still have to use a semicolon to disambiguate the comma, right? So there are a lot of different variations possible, and we are going to look at examples, right? But know that the semicolon works as a super comma when items in a series already have commas. Okay. Now let's look at another variation. Okay. Let's look at this sentence. During the SAT, you are allowed to bring pencils, a calculator for the math section, and a traditional watch. So here, what's going on is we make a statement or an introduction here, and then we put a colon, okay, and then follow the items in the series, right, or follow it with the items in the series, right? So this is kind of an introductory phrase or a clause followed by a colon. Okay, so this is another variation that you will see, and typically they'll put a blank here. Okay, then if colon is the choice, is one of the choices, then use a colon here. Actually, in fact, in this sentence, you may even not use the colon; it would still make sense. Okay, but look at the choices that are available to you, and you can use a colon in front of an introductory phrase and then follow it up with a series of items separated by a comma, or if it is a complex series, then use semicolon to separate the items. Okay, so this is another variation. Okay. So I'm going to give you another sentence. This is strictly not about punctuating a series, but it's good to know. Like for example, take this sentence. The SAT is administered on a computer. Okay, maybe I should say the SAT or the SIT, right? Is administered on a computer. But you can bring, or you can say you can bring the maybe not but here. Okay, sorry. You can bring the following things, however: pencils, a calculator for the math section, and a traditional watch. So this is also a colon. But the weird usage here is you can, instead of, actually, we could write the sentence like this, right? We could say SAT is administered on a computer. However, you can bring the following things. Then you can put a colon and then describe what those things are, or list the things that you can bring. But this has a weird usage where the however goes to the end, right? So it says you can bring the following things, comma, however, colon. Okay, so I picked up this example from the sample SAT questions from Blue Book. Okay, and I did find a couple of questions that had this usage, and that's why I decided to add this in Just Logged In, because in case you get something like this on the real test, you already know how to deal with this kind of question. So this is essentially, I mean, this is not an incorrect usage, however. Okay, so this is essentially moving this phrase, however, to the end of the sentence. Okay, which is not something that we would normally do, but you could do that, and there's nothing wrong. So when they have this, with a blank, then you should know that, hey, this is actually depicting a contrast, which is that, hey, the SAT is administered on a computer, so strictly you don't need anything else. Just pick up your admission ticket or ID card or whatever it is that they ask you to take as identification information, and just go there and take the test. You have a clock, you have an online calculator, right? They give you sheets to work on and all that, and you strictly don't need anything else, right? However, you can bring the following things, right? So that's what it is saying, right? And this contrast can contrast, or an exception, or whatever it is. You can phrase it like this, right? By adding however at the end of the sentence. Okay, so know this usage. Okay, if you encounter this, then you know how to deal with this. Okay, I'm going to show you examples here, which are coming next, but just know this usage. All right, so this is all from a concept perspective. You need to know about punctuating a series. So if I have to summarize, when you have a list of items, separate them with comma. If each of those items already has a comma, then use a semicolon as a super comma to separate the items. Okay, so this is called a complex series. Okay, and remember that in complex series, not all items have to have a comma. Okay, even if one or two items have a comma, you have to use a semicolon to separate the items in the list, so that there is no ambiguity. All right. And the third thing, you can use an introductory clause or a phrase before you start a list, and at the end of that introductory clause or phrase, put a semicolon. Not semicolon. Put a colon. That is the two dots. Use a colon, and then you can list the items. Okay, and here is a special case, right, where you use this contrast word, however, at the end of the sentence. Okay, followed by a colon, and the list follows. Okay, so that's all we have here in terms of the general structure. So we'll go look at some specific examples, and then we'll work some questions too. Okay. So let's look at a few examples, right? It's a simple series, right, with just commas. The reforms included the abortion of, let me just pull this. Yeah, I'm sorry. So the reforms included the abortion of monarchy, universal male suffrage, and the adoption of a new calendar. Okay, so there are three items here on the list: abolition of the monarchy, universal male suffrage, and the adoption of a new calendar. Okay, so we have commas and then there is a comma before the and. All right, so we have that. Catalysts lower activation energy, stay chemically unchanged, and speed up reactions. Okay, so what do catalysts do? They lower activation energy, they stay chemically unchanged, and they speed up reactions. Okay, so these are the three things that catalysts do, and you have these three items separated by commas. Okay, so the mural brightened plazas, highway underpasses, and school courtyards. Right. So what did it do? It brightened plazas, highway underpasses, and school courtyards. And you do that. You use a comma to separate these items. Okay. Now let's look at the complex. Okay, let's look at the question here in the simple three item list, right? So this is one of those questions that you will get, or rather the pattern of the question that you'll get asked. So in the radical phase of the French Revolution, the National Convention enacted reforms such as the abolition of the monarchy, universal main suffrage, and the adoption of a new calendar. So this is a version of what we just saw, right? So abolition of the monarchy, universal. So when you read this, you know that they enacted reforms such as, so such as gives you the clue, a list is going to follow it, right? So what is the list? What reforms did they do? They abolished the monarchy. They introduced universal male suffrage, and then they adopted a new calendar. So therefore, monarchy, comma, is the right answer. So you have abolition of the monarchy, comma, universal male suffrage, and whatnot. All right. So this is the three item list. Now let's do complex series. Okay. When you do the complex series, the consortium honored Rina Sato, a senior designer, Omar Haddad, a Cairo professor, and Leela Petrov, a seismologist. Okay. So this list, so the consortium honored these three people, right? Rina, Omar, and Leela, right? And what we also do is, in addition to the names, we also say who they were, right? Or what did they do, right? So Rina Sato was a sensor designer. So it was Rina Sato, comma, a sensor designer. And then Omar Haddad, a Cairo professor, right? So maybe he was a professor in the Cairo University or something, okay? And Leela Petrov, a seismologist, okay? So therefore, each of these items already have a comma, so we use a semicolon to separate these items, okay? This is another example like this. The winners came from Lima, Peru, Oslo, Norway, and Cairo, Egypt. So we have these names of cities which turn out to be capitals of their respective countries, and we also have the country, right? So it's Lima, comma, Peru, Oslo, comma, Norway, and Cairo, comma, Egypt, and therefore we use a semicolon to disambiguate the items in this list. Otherwise, it's going to look like winners came from Lima, Peru, Oslo, Norway, as if this is a 6-item list, right, at Cairo. All right, this is going to look like a 6-item list, whereas it's not, right? So therefore, we put these semicolons to disambiguate. Okay. The third one, the panel includes a physicist who chaired the panel, right? A chemist who was newly hired, and a biologist. Now, this is a very interesting example. So if you see, this item has a comma internally. So this item also has a comma internally, but whereas the biologist, there's no supplementary information or a modifier or whatever it is, right? So this item does not have a comma. Okay, so when you have this mixed comma and no comma kind of items in the list, maybe like a hybrid list of sorts, you still use a semicolon to disambiguate. Okay, so this is very important, right? So for example, if they put a blank here, right, then you need to look forward to see, hey, there was actually a semicolon, so you use a semicolon. Okay, so this is your complex series. Okay, so semicolons are super commas, right, where we're going to separate whole items where these items already have commas in them. Okay, now I think this is one of those similar questions. So the consortium recognized 3 researchers. Okay, Rina Sato, who designed a cross-border sensor array, Omar Haddad, a professor of geophysics at Cairo University, and Lila Petrova, a seismologist at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. Okay, so geophysics at Cairo University. So when you do this, you have, if you look at the options, there's a Cairo University comma, right, which might be a tempting choice to make. All right, and there's Cairo University without any punctuation, and then we have a semicolon and a colon. And I would believe that a colon might be easy to dismiss. A comma might be tempting, right? But this one needs a semicolon. Okay, and you get a hint here, right? So if you look at the sentence carefully, they've already used a semicolon. Okay, so you just use a semicolon because that's already been used to disambiguate. And of course, when you read the items more carefully, you notice that there is already a comma, right? So you need to do some careful reading of the given sentence before you pick a choice. All right. Okay, so introducing a list. Okay, so this is what we talked about as the third thing when we reviewed our initial set of examples. So its immediate priorities were threefold, colon. What were those priorities? So it introduces that, right? Repatriation, rebuilding, and reconciliation. Okay. The kit holds 3 tools, right? It introduces a list, a wrench, a driver, and pliers. She studied 2 eras, the Baroque and the Romantic era, right? So, so your colon introduces a list, and let's see if we have an example for this. And yes, we do. So, a regional consortium coordinated relief and reconstruction. Its immediate priorities were threefold: to facilitate the repatriation of refugees, to rebuild local institutions, and to encourage social reconciliation. So you have to really place these words here to see where or to see what makes sense, right? So obviously, this is the list, and therefore its immediate priorities were threefold. So this is the introduction to the list that follows, and therefore colon is the correct answer. Okay, so these are techniques that's a little bit hard to teach. To be honest, you need to place these words here and see what makes sense. Okay, you have to determine whether this is an introduction or not. Okay, now let's look at the example of the however phrase. Right, so here's the example. Only 5 of these techniques are emphasized in our studio's foundational course. Okay, scumbling, glazing, impasto, dry brush, and alla prima. I don't know what these are, but anyway, only 5 of these techniques. Okay, so essentially, this is a listing of these 5 techniques, right? So therefore, I would expect a colon in front, okay, because this clearly introduces this list. But we see, however, over here, right? So therefore, what we do is this is a contrast. But actually, if you look at this example, there was probably another sentence. So when you read this in the context of the other sentence, maybe the contrast would be more evident. But even without that, it's quite obvious that the however serves as a contrast, and therefore we just say foundational course, however, colon, then the 5 example. So this is clearly an introductory clause, okay, which has which contrasts whatever is told in the previous sentence, right? And therefore it has a however before the colon, okay, to emphasize the contrast or the exception. Okay, so what do you do on the test day when you see a question, right? So first, count the items, right? So you have to identify that there is actually a list, right? So that's one of the first things you must do. And then once you identify there is a list, it must be obvious, right? So the moment you see a list, look inside each item in the list. Does it have internal commas? If you see internal commas, then use semicolons, okay? If there are no internal commas, then use commas, okay? And I would also add one more thing here, and that is, look at the rest of the sentence, right? Does it already use semicolons? If it already uses semicolons, then you have to use a semicolon, right? So that is that as well that you need to consider. Introducing the list, right? So see, you have a list, right? And then if there is a clause that introduces the list, then you have to have a colon, okay? So therefore, when they put a blank and then they give you those answer choices, just pick whatever is in the answer choices, put it back in the sentence, right? And see whether there is an introductory element there. So if there is an introductory element there, then you have to put a colon, and then the list must follow, okay? And always match the existing pattern. So this is what I said. Look at the complete sentence, and if it was already using semicolons, use semicolons. If it was already using commas, then use commas, okay? But when you look at commas, just make sure that those are not internal commas, right? I mean, they must be the ones that are separating the items in the list, okay? So that's kind of the gist of what you need to do when you see these types of questions, okay? Okay, so now let's work a few problems involving the use of series punctuation. All right, and to do that, just go to justloggedin.com. I provided the link below, and when you go to JustLoggedIn, go to Build Your Skills and get to Standard English Conventions, Boundaries. You can do question by question. If you go to question by question, you can just choose the pattern here, punctuating items in a series. Okay, so this is part of the boundaries domain. Okay, now what you could also do is, if you go to pattern strategies, reading and writing, go to standard English conventions, go to punctuating items in a series, you have everything that we discuss. I mean, all the notes is here in the form of a lesson, all the examples, and what you do is just click on this green button and you can directly go and practice this specific pattern. All right. So when you practice on Just Logged In, especially when you're going from build skills, click on anything, you can immediately create a test. Right? You could do a 20-question test or a 10-question test. Okay. So you can create tests on demand, and of course you can go ahead and take section full length tests as well. Okay. So now I've bookmarked a few questions. So you could do that when you do your practice, or even when you take a test or reviewing test questions, if there is any question that you want to save for later review, say before the test or maybe sometime later, you could bookmark those questions and they'll all be pretty neatly organized for you by topic. Okay. So now let's go to boundaries and let's go pick our first question. All right. So here, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration are two of the many organizations focused on analyzing temperature records, both land and ocean based, modeling future climate scenarios, and communicating risks to policymakers. Okay, this is a fairly complex question. Okay, so IPCC or IGPCC, whatever, right, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So these are two of the many organizations focused on analyzing temperature records, both land and ocean based, modeling future climate scenarios, and communicating risks to policymakers. Okay, so when you look at this, you know that this is actually a list, right? So because what are the things that these two organizations do? They are focused on analyzing temperature records. Both land and ocean based is essentially a modifier, or not modifier. I mean, it's supplementary information for temperature records. Hey, what temperature records? Both land-based records and ocean-based records. Okay, and then modeling. So that's the first thing they do. The second thing they do is modeling future climate scenarios. And the third thing they do is communicating risks to policymakers. Okay. And now when you see modeling future climate scenarios, you see a semicolon already, right? So they are using a semicolon for separating the items in the list. And therefore, whatever items this is, it must end in a semicolon. Okay. And they're using a semicolon because there is a comma in at least one of the items in the list. And you don't see a comma here either in this item or this item, and therefore there must be a comma in the first item here. Okay, so these are all the hints that you get by just looking at this one here. Okay, so the key thing here is for you to identify that, hey, there is actually a list of items. Okay, so once you understand, or once you figure out that you are dealing with the list of items, okay, and you're going to be able to figure that out only when you read it. Okay, so once you know that you are dealing with the list of items, then the algorithm is very simple. Okay, so you're looking for a semicolon, and then you're looking for if there are any commas in these list items. Okay, so now that we know that this has to end in a semicolon, in fact, this is the only option that ends in a semicolon. So this must be the correct answer, but let's go look at it, right? So these two organizations are two of the many organizations focused on analyzing temperature records, comma, both land and ocean based. So this is supplementary information for temperature records. So it says something additional about temperature records, and that is both land and ocean based, right? And because this item has a comma, we use a semicolon to separate this list. Okay, so that's how we end up with this, or rather, that's how we answer this question, and this must be the correct answer. All right. So in the 1870s, Heinrich Schliemann financed excavations at Hisarlik and unconventional dash, kept meticulous field diaries, a habit that later aided verification, and promoted his weekly findings in newspapers. Okay, so this is listing what Heinrich did, right? What did he do? He financed excavations at Hisarlik, okay, an unconventional approach at the time. Okay, so essentially what this is doing is it is adding some information about this whole process of financing excavations at Hisarlik, which was perhaps an unconventional approach at the time he did that, that is in the 1870s. Then what did he do? He kept meticulous field diaries, okay? And then a habit that later aided verification. So this, the one after the comma, adds additional information to his habit of keeping meticulous field diaries. Okay, so what it's saying, he kept meticulous field diaries, and that is a habit that later aided verification. So it's adding supplementary information. And what did he do next? He promoted his findings widely in newspapers, and they're using a semicolon to separate this list, because the second one, if you see, already has a comma, and the first one also has a comma, an unconventional approach at the time. So here, if we complete this, this becomes unconventional approach at the time. There is no need for an internal comma here, okay? So it is an unconventional approach at a time, and you just end it with a semicolon, because this list uses semicolon to separate the items, okay? So therefore, this must be the correct answer, okay? So essentially, if you look at how we are solving this problem, first you read it, you identify that this is actually a list, then you look at the items in the list to see whether this is a simple list or a compound, or a not compound, or a complex list, okay? And whether there is already a comma in one or more items in the list, and then we see whether we need to use a comma or a semicolon as punctuation, okay? So this is what we are doing. All right, so let's go to the next question. In introductory chemistry, instructors emphasize that catalysts are not consumed in reactions, okay? So there is a colon. So this is introducing a list, okay? Catalysts are not consumed in reactions. Instead, what do? They lower activation energy, remain chemically unchanged afterwards, and increase the rate at which products form, right? So if you see, they're already using a comma to punctuate the series. So all we need to do is, in reactions, they activate they lower activation energy, right? So this must be the correct answer. We need to add a comma, because that's the end of the first item. Then remain chemically unchanged afterwards, the second one, and then increase the rate at which the products form. Okay, so that must be the correct answer. All right, now let's look at the next question. This is perhaps the last one we are going to see. A standard weather station tracks wind speed and rainfall. Satellite systems can measure surface temperatures across dash and predict storm paths. Okay. So satellite systems can measure surface temperature across continents, okay, monitor atmospheric moisture, and predict storm paths. So this is actually, it must be a 3-object list, right? Which is, satellite systems can do what? They can measure surface temperatures across continents, comma, monitor atmospheric moisture, comma, and predict storm paths. So this must be the correct answer. We cannot say A, because satellite systems can measure surface temperature across continents. This is not an introductory phrase, right? The part about it can measure surface temperature across continents itself is one of the things that satellite systems can do, and therefore that itself is one of the items in the list of things that it can do, right? So this is not the right answer, okay? And similarly here, this is kind of a run-on here. Like, I mean, it doesn't make sense if you actually put and read through it, right? And in the fourth one, the semicolon is certainly not how we are punctuating this series, okay? So because there is no comma in each of those items, so because there is no comma within the items itself, you can use a comma to punctuate. That's always our first choice, punctuation, to separate items in a list. So therefore, B must be the correct answer. Okay, so that's all we have in terms of examples. right? And I think we've covered a number of examples here. So this is really simple. So just to summarize, okay, your key task is, when you get a question like this, is to, number one, find out that, hey, this is a question which has a list of items and they're asking us to punctuate the list. Okay, so finding that is the key thing, and you can only figure that out by reading the question and substituting your answer choice words, that is the words in the answer choices, into the sentence, and then reading the sentence, figuring that out. Okay, so that's number one. The second thing is, once you figure out that this involves a list, then it's a fairly straightforward algorithm. Okay, so what you need to do is just look at the elements of the list, see if there is a comma. Is this a complex series? Then you're going to use semicolons. Otherwise, you're going to use commas. Okay, and if there is an introductory phrase, then a colon must follow the introductory phrase. Okay, so that's all there is to it in summary, and we'll see in the next video. All right, thanks.